Compassion can lead to a lot of energy and a lot of effort, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the energy and the effort is fruitful and has great outcomes associated with it. And that's what we found.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of DNA Live. My name is Jeff Wright. I'm here with Dwight Vogt. Dwight, how are you?
Hi, Jeff. Good.
We are into our cadence of DNA Live every 2 weeks, coming to you live on Facebook. Some recent insight, though, that we've had as we've continued to roll out YouTube videos, continue to publish our new podcast, that YouTube has been our biggest source of viewership thus far. And so we've settled on staying here because it's comfortable, it's fun, it keeps us on our toes to do this live. And so we continue to come here every 2 weeks, Friday mornings, 10 a.m. Arizona time, and usually with a special guest discussing things on the level of worldview, examining those worldviews themselves. And then we are sharing this video as well on YouTube. Usually now our turnaround time is getting quicker and quicker. And so by Monday next week, this should be up and rolling. And you can find that on Disciple Nations Alliance on our YouTube page. And we also have a podcast, the Disciple Nations Alliance podcast. You can find that wherever you listen to your podcast. So please check those out. Like this video, like our page, share the video, find us and leave us comments on YouTube as well. And we appreciate that. Yeah, please help us equip people around the world with more of a biblical worldview. Amen?
Amen.
Yeah. Along those lines, we continue to produce new resources apart from just the DNA Live that we're doing. We have our flagship free online biblical worldview course called corumdeo.com. And we have a very exciting rebranding. Would you call it that, Dwight? A rebranding coming.
Rebranding, reformatting.
It's a better user interface.
Refreshed.
It's we've changed some of the modules. We've shuffled a little bit, right? Just so that it all makes a little bit more sense. So that it's a better experience for the user as they dive into sort of a biblical worldview 101. Our Coram Deo Basics course. We've changed the name. It's now the Kingdomizer training course. And Kingdomizer, very excited about Kingdomizers. We borrowed that from our Brazilian friends, I think, right?
Yeah.
And so our Brazilian DNA partners, they, in response to diving into the DNA material, decided that they were going to call themselves the Kingdomizers, those who advance the truth, beauty, and goodness of the kingdom of God. And so they do everything in Portuguese, but then they've got this really, they've got the American word, or the English word, Kingdomizer, which you're not going to find in a dictionary anyhow. So it's just a great, it's, for those who like language, it's a great little word. And so as we were brainstorming what this rebrand would look like, we said we're gonna call it the Kingdomizer Training Program. That's what we hope to do. That is our hope and prayer, our mission and vision, the DNA to raise up Kingdomizers that would transform their communities, that would advance the kingdom of God, that would disciple nations for His glory.
And if you're on our mailing list, and if you're not, you should be, but you should be getting an email next week, Monday or Tuesday, announcing the launch of that and how you can get to it. Anyway, so that's coming.
Very cool.
Really soon.
Yeah. To get to our mailing list, to get on that mailing list, you just go to disciplenations.org, and there is a sign-up sheet. I believe it's on the front landing page. You might need to scroll down, and there's other prompts to sign up throughout the website as well. If you're on the website, you can check out the resources, many resources we have available to you. One of our core operating principles is to offer our resources as open-handedly as possible. That's why the Kingdomizer training program is free to you. That's why many of our resources are free to you. And also, we have a global network of kingdomizers around the world. And so if you are not a native English speaker and you would like to connect to somebody, perhaps in your native language group, somebody on your continent, please reach out to us. There's ways to get in touch with us on our website. You can do that right here through Facebook, and we will put you in touch with somebody closer in proximity and somebody who speaks your native language as well. We're happy to do that. So without further ado, I'm really excited. This is our first guest of season 2 of DNA Live. I will do a brief introduction, and then I'll ask James to join us. We're so happy to have James Whitford join us today. He is the executive director of Watered Gardens Ministries and the True Charity Initiative, which he co-founded with his wife, Marcia. I hope we spend a lot of this hour discussing the history of those ministries and your story, James. So I'm not going to say anything more. I just want to give you a warm DNA welcome. Hello.
Well, thanks, Jeff.
Hey,
It's
James.
great to be with you and Dwight today.
Glad to have you. We are officially in season 2, and you are our first season 2 guest here. So
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, we started this in response to the entire world saying, guess what? We're only going to see each other through a screen for a while. And we said,
Right.
Well, we're going to meet you there. And we wrapped up mid-December of last year, and we started up 2 weeks ago again with Scott and I talking. So we're really happy to have you here. This is
glad to be the first guest on season 2.
Yeah, and as DNA has gotten to know True Charity a bit, Scott personally, Dwight personally as well, we've just been very impressed with what you guys are about. So Dwight, why don't you throw the first pitch out here?
Okay. Yeah, James, it's good to see you again, and just really enjoyed going through some of your content even personally, and really, really impressed by it. So we're grateful to have you on and would like to hear more about it. But I'd like to start just by, hey, who are you? Tell us about yourself, a little bit of your history. And
Sure. Yeah. Well, yep. My wife and I co-founded just a very small nonprofit in Southwest Missouri in 2000. And at that time, I was practicing physical therapy and wound care. That was my bread and butter job. And then we just as volunteers launched a very small outreach to help people who were struggling and in need. And it, what a lot of people ask, what started that? Why did you begin that? And as I was just thinking about that earlier, I remember a time being in inner city Fort Worth on a very short-term mission trip, and my heart was impacted in a significant way. I remember being in the upstairs room of a homeless mission called Beautiful Feet, and I was up there, and how the Lord apprehended me. And literally, I ended up on my knees and weeping, and had just an overload of God's compassion for people who were struggling in really severe poverty there in that city. And of course, when we're ignited with compassion like that, we want to do something. And so my wife and I, began to think about what could we do in our hometown of Joplin. And that's kind of how we got things started. But compassion can lead to a lot of energy and a lot of effort, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the energy and the effort is fruitful and has great outcomes associated with it. And that's what we found. I mean, we were kind of like a central clearinghouse initially. People would donate items, clothing, food, furniture, appliances, things like that. We're meeting a lot of people who are struggling in poverty, basically in a handout model. This is back in 2000, giving stuff away, praying for people. Again, a lot of good heart behind it, but there wasn't a lot of good thought behind it. And so in the first few years, we began to realize that our efforts were not producing the outcomes that we had hoped to see in people's lives. And in fact, We even still today can recall specific stories of when we thought we were helping somebody only to find out that there was really uh, dependency that was forming in people, or there was even abuse sometimes of charity that was less thoughtful than what we've
Mm.
learned to practice these days.
I'm glad you say that, because I was going to ask you. Sometimes
Yeah.
it helps to break the paradigm if you give some specific examples. Go ahead, go ahead.
Oh, sure. Well, like I remember,
Shatter
sure.
some
Yeah, I
shatter some
remember.
glasses on the floor here.
I remember one time um, when we had helped someone with, I think it was a microwave, and I don't remember how long after that it was, but we were kind of meandering through a flea market, and there was a booth, and they were selling some microwaves, and it was the same person who'd come by our outreach center asking for a microwave.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was that type of thing. There was another incident where we saw a rummage sale where things were being sold, and so we uh, people are smart.
They
We need
are
to
smart.
remember that. We should never look at people who are struggling, with in poverty and say, well, they don't have an intelligence about them, because we certainly found that to not be true. So yeah, there were things like that happened. I remember one time a guy comes in, and this will lead to one of the things that we put in place that helped with this in our own community. But there was a guy who walked in. My wife is sitting at the front desk. There's a guy who walks in. He's got a cervical soft collar around his neck, and he comes in and he walks up to Marcia, and he says, "I need some help." And she says, "Well, what can I do for you?" And he says, "Well, I've broken my neck and I'm paralyzed from the neck down." Well, yeah, right. So Jeff's got that quizzical look. I mean, he walked in, right? And of course, my wife begins to engage him to find out that the story he's, sharing is not true. Well, he leaves that day. Now, we didn't help him with anything, but then the question that we began to ask ourselves is, where does he go next?
Hmm.
And does he go in with a wheelchair the next time, or a walker, and so we realized that there was a great disconnectedness in our own community among churches, charities, and nonprofits, who really, a lot of them have leaders with great hearts and team players who want to really help people, but because they weren't connected in the community, knowing what's going on with individuals and families that are coming into their own places of service, there's no way to know what's happening sometimes with those individuals. So in order to help our community be more closely knit together and to work together as a cohesive unit rather than a bunch of separate nonprofits, we launched a networking tool in our community called Charity Tracker. Charity Tracker is created by another group, but at that time, we were the most northwest city to have it, and that was in southwest Missouri. It had come out of northern Alabama, and it was developed as a result of Hurricane Katrina and the resource distribution nightmare, where you had people coming from out of state coming in to just grab hold of whatever they could, and no one knew who was really in need. And that's so important. If in our charity work, we're gonna make sure that we're not marching people into a pattern of dependency. We're going to have to make sure that our communities are connected together, we're sharing information, and we're talking to one another. Charity Tracker is just a tool that allows us to do that. So instantly, when I put any information into our system, there are scores of other nonprofits and churches in our area who immediately have access to the same information. Again, it allows us to steward our resource more effectively and to target our charity more accurately.
Okay. At that time, were you just a mom and pop operation, or did you organize right away?
Well, no, that's interesting. It was certainly mom and pop. Marcia and I were volunteers, and we had other volunteers that began to join us over this first few years. For the first 10 years, it was a completely volunteer-driven organization. We were initially a subsidiary of a 501c3 called the Pastors Prayer Summit.
Huh.
Pastors Prayer Summit was a group of pastors that had organized themselves together to pray. And of course, when you get close to God in prayer, you want to do something for the poor. I mean, that's just natural. So it was a very natural connection that was made between really an eldership in our city and a Stephen ministry,
Okay.
which was Water Gardens. And so we were a subsidiary of that organization for the first couple of years before we incorporated as our own nonprofit.
And Water Gardens Ministry, it's part of the network of gospel missions, or is it unique or
We
separate?
we
Or?
did when we started our overnight shelter service, Dwight, in 2011. That's when we joined what was then called the Association of Gospel Rescue Missions.
Okay.
It's now called City Gate Network, but it is a network of about 300 poverty fighting nonprofits that often have a focus on homelessness.
Yeah. We're interested in the name too. He says Water Gardens. Jeff was saying it sounds like a landscape business, but anyway.
Well, he's not the first one to think that.
How did you come up with that name, you know?
Well, yeah, it's interesting. We used to get calls from people early on and early in the year, when we first started, that they would ask for bird baths. Do you guys sell bird yeah, garden hoses there, that kind of thing? And then we would say, no, we're a ministry, and it comes out of Isaiah chapter 58. And so it became kind of an opportunity sometimes to just share scripture. But in Isaiah chapter 58, God, through the prophet, is chastising his people for going through the motions. Basically, they're showing up to church every Sunday and Wednesday, but he goes on to say, that's not the fast that I choose for you. And in verse 6, he begins to talk about the fast that he chooses for his people, which is to divide their bread with the hungry, to clothe the naked, to shelter the poor, to not ignore your own flesh and blood, and bring the homeless poor into your house. And then he goes on to list some contingencies. If you do this, then the glory of the Lord will be your rear guard. When you call out on my name, he'll say, here I am. And you'll be like a watered garden and like a spring whose waters never fail. And so it is a beautiful promise for the body of Christ. And it's kind of an interesting, when God laid the mission on our hearts, it's always been to serve the church, really more than serving the poor.
Mm-hmm.
It's realizing that the church today has the answer to address the plight that's really at the heart of mankind, the gospel of Jesus Christ. And so early on, we realized that our mission statement is to serve the church in its mission to help the poor. And so everything that we do, we think about how can we be empowering, encouraging, equipping the church to do the work that God has called her to do in truly resolving poverty in people's lives.
It's interesting. I'm assuming going through your True Charity University, I think one of the last courses is reclaiming your sphere, and it's talking about the church reclaiming the sphere of poverty work and working with the poor. And that leads. How you comment on that? But I'm wondering how that led to True Charity University or the True Charity initiatives.
Yeah, that's a good question. I do think there has been some crowd out effect that's occurred. Sometimes we think, has the church abdicated her responsibility, or was the church crowded out of her responsibility? Was there a combination of those things that have occurred?
Or you find them involved, but it's usually a food pantry.
Right.
It's something really basic, really simple. It's not.
Yeah, so it feels so good to give, though, Dwight. We want to,
and that's why we do it. But
so it feels good to give, but we have to. If the closer we get to God, the more we realize it's just not about if we feel good about what we're doing. We really want to make sure that we're bringing about or partnering with God in delivering justice, right? Real biblical justice. Things obviously in the lives of the people that we're dealing with at our mission on a day-to-day basis are not as God has intended. Something has certainly gone awry from his original plan for that individual and the people that we're serving. And so that's how we define justice, right?
I think that's interesting because you've also, and you say that's how you define poverty as well, I think. It's a person who does not have the ability, you know it better than me, what is it? Does not have the ability to live out the life God intends for them. I think those are almost your exact words. I'm thinking, what a powerful definition, that poverty is not being able to live out the life God intends for you.
Right.
That just says, okay, then we need to help people live out that life.
And isn't that so much of a better definition than not having, enough
Stuff.
money in your bank
Right.
account or enough material? I mean, because if poverty is defined by material lack, then how do we solve it? Well, we give stuff away. And that is not helping. In fact, I'm quite certain it's widening the divide between those who have and those who don't, rather than what a lot of people would hope it would do, which is close the gap. But it doesn't, especially relationally. It just drives it even further apart. And so we were seeing some of that. We did our connection in our community that I was talking about through Charity Tracker. And then we realized we're still lost in a handout model. I read a book by a guy named Robert Lupton called Toxic Charity, and he talks about 5 steps to dependency. When you give something to somebody once, they'll appreciate it. If you give it to them again, they'll have an anticipation that will develop that you'll do it a 3rd time. If you give it to them a 3rd time, they'll have an expectation that you'll do it a 4th. If you give it to them a 4th time, they'll feel entitled to it. And a 5th time, they'll be dependent on you for it. So it was appreciation, anticipation, expectation, entitlement, dependency. So when I read these 5 steps to dependency, I thought, I've seen that. I mean, I've been witnessing that. I've been guilty of that. And so we decided to make a big change and began to look at people as more than the recipients of charity, but folks who could be the primary, play the primary role in their walk out of poverty. Want to help them in that. But in viewing the person like that, we no longer look at people that come in our doors as, oh, look at the brokenness and all the hurdles and all the dysfunction. We're actually looking at what is your capacity, your potential, and your ability. And so
that's your starting point then.
That's more of our starting point.
Could you give those 3 one more time?
Say that again.
What are you gave 3 things. What are
well, capacity, ability.
Yeah, it's those potential.
Those types of things. Yeah. So we've trained our team, and those who are going, through our True Charity Initiative program work are learning to view people as people made in the image of God, who are then, because they're made in the image of God, are naturally creators and producers themselves. And if we don't call on that, if we don't have some expectation to see that in our charity work, then we're really robbing them of dignity and being reflecting the image of God in which they've been made. And so so we launched a thing called a Worth Shop. We call it a Worth Shop because we believe work.
I like it.
So we have a Worth Shop with one of our campuses now in Joplin. We've got 4 different ministries that are in operation. That's one of them. But it is a place where people can go to earn what they need. And what we found is that almost everybody can do something for what it is they need. And it's not to say that we ignore relief. I mean, real relief in an emergent situation is important to provide, because life is precious and it needs to be preserved and it needs to be saved.
I like that. I appreciate that, because I don't want to discount. I don't want people to hear this and discount the relief aspect of it. I mean, you're hungry today. Let's get you some food in your belly. And then figure this out. Right.
That's right.
Yeah.
But I mean, we've got some time. I mean, the question is, how do you know if a person is in need of relief or not?
Yeah.
That's your 3rd lesson.
Yeah, that's where investing.
I think, is it categorization or something like that?
That's exactly. Boy, you're on.
Star pupil, Dwight.
I'm sorry. Yeah, give me.
Where's your certificate? Why isn't it on the wall behind you?
I should have plastered my wall. You're right.
That's right.
I thought that was a really good point. Yeah, go ahead, unpack that a bit for us.
Well, it's the principle of categorization, which really is something that Marvin Olasky wrote a little bit about in a book back in the late 90s that he wrote called The Tragedy of American Compassion. And back in the late 19th, early 20th century, it was more common to practice categorization, which is this idea that we don't need to apply a one-size-fits-all type of charity to a broad group of people. Each person is different. We need to be careful, and we need to investigate a little bit. We need to dive a little bit more deeply into some of the situations that are going to know, is this person really in need of relief, or are they in need of rehabilitation or development? And so those are the three things we talk about coming out of the book When Helping Hurts by Fickert and Corbin, I think. Yeah, and so we relief, rehabilitation, development. How do you know where a person is? That's the practice of categorization that is important to employ.
I was thinking about that. Even James, or Stephen, uh, Stephen, his ministry in Acts. It's the first thing he did was categorize and say which widows are deserving, which ones aren't, which ones need this, which ones need that.
So
That's
Yeah, it goes way back.
yeah, and then it's talked about in Second Timothy, I believe, as well. The importance of really knowing who are the widows that are really in need in a community.
so
Oh,
isn't
and even with our children, sorry, Jeff, but even
well,
with our kids, I'm thinking, we never treat our kids equally. That sounds heretical that you don't treat your kids equally, but I view them equal and I value them equally, but they're so different that to help them move along, we have to categorize throughout life,
Absolutely.
Well,
and
sure.
why would that be different with other human beings,
Well, no, that's exactly right. Sometimes I'll give an example, it's not a real life example, but you can imagine if you had identical twins raised in the same environment, they were nurtured in the same way, but one ends up, for whatever reason, a drug addict, and another ends up a hoarder. So if you have somebody who's hoarding and someone who's addicted to drugs, and they're coming to you and they're in need of, they whatever it is, it could be money, it could be, you have to treat those individuals differently. You can't just because they're at the same poverty level and of the same background and of the same race, say, well, this is what we're going to do for you, because it could be dangerous to one and helpful to the other. So categorization is an important principle to practice in charity. Yeah.
I'm at a Airbnb right now, and there's a train passing outside my window. I hope it's not. It's pretty neat. It's a steam engine.
Well, I can't see it or hear it.
No. Okay. Good. Good. I didn't want it to interfere. So James, isn't that disappointing to a lot of people to hear that charity is going to require work and nuance and diving in? I mean, I feel like, and I don't want to besmirch anyone, but there are people out there where the end for charity is the check mark that I've done something charitable. I mean, there's a ministry that's started a few years ago in Phoenix in response to the holiday giving and how unhealthy it was. There are literal stories of ladies pulling up, opening their door to their car, and leaving entire Thanksgiving meals in front of the police station. I mean, and then the check mark was there, but the police, you cannot leave this here. It's going into the garbage. And she's like, I've done it,
So when we were before we actually employed this earn it model through our workshop, we were seeing about 4,000 people a year through the doors of our mission at that point in our history. That would have been around the 2010 mark. And when we employed that earn it model, we dropped to seeing about 13 to 1,400 people a year. So a significant number of people left. Now, if you're just wanting to check boxes, you'd say, darn it, that's 2,700 boxes I don't get to check. But truth be told, the ones that we do get to check are so much more meaningful. And I was thinking, as you were talking about the Christmas help season, right? We have a toy store that we put together every year, and parents will come and shop for toys, and then they're not price tagged, they're time tagged. And so rather than trying to, for a person who has no money, to try to find the money to buy Christmas for their kids, what are they left to do? Well, some parents will take their kids through a line where a wrapped gift that you don't even know what it is gets handed to the child by somebody they don't even know. But what we've done is the parents can come and shop for the gift that fits just what they want to get for their child. And then they're able to go and earn it in our worth shop. And when they come back, the comments from that have been astounding. And I mean, we've started to document them just because they're so beautiful to hear the remarks of a grandmother. I actually helped a grandma out with her gifts after she earned them. And she said, I just want you to know how thankful I am that you guys were here the week before Christmas to let me come and work for these gifts for my grandchildren. And there have been many other people who've talked about how good they feel that they get to give a gift from them to their children rather than someone else giving a gift to their children. So it slows things down. It's, we don't see as many people, but what the impact that we're having is so much more meaningful and so much more rewarding.
Mm-hmm.
So it's actually effective, just not as efficient.
Right. That's a very good way to put it. And we can look at
Quite a trade-off.
As industrialization was taking off, there people were moving into city centers, and there was a demand for efficiency. And I think we saw at that point some of these small points of light charities that began to to try to figure how do we do this, and there was a tendency at that point to centralize that service. And as a result, I think people did begin to look more to government to solve some of those problems, but it became an issue of efficiency rather than effectiveness.
You mentioned work and working for gifts. I mean, what is it about work that's so empowering? I mean, what do you think? I mean, you're going to have Ann Bradley join you, you said in your summit here coming in May, and I know she loves to talk about work,
Yeah.
But what's your experience and what do you see that it's so?
I've got a lot of great stories about that, but I think, one of the first things I thought of as you asked that question, Dwight, is a book by Arthur Brooks. And I don't remember which one it is now. I'm trying to think, but in it, he's a researcher, and he talks about how the working poor are so much more likely to give than the welfare poor, even though they have the same liquid asset. Now, I remember reading that and looking at the research he was citing, and I thought, how interesting that
You would
that
think the opposite.
right, you might
You
think
think
the
that you
opposite.
might,
So,
well, I had to work for this. I'm not going to give it away. Whereas, oh, I just got it. So sure, have
so
some.
I don't think Arthur dives into the why maybe as much as I have myself, but I really believe that when a person realizes they have the ability to produce or create wealth for themselves, that they're much more likely to say, I can give some of this because I know that I have a source for that. I can go back to the same
Okay.
place and draw again, and it is work. And so I feel like there's that kind of empowerment that happens when a person realizes, hey, I am not dependent upon someone else to make sure that my basic needs are being met. uh, that's incredibly important. Now, there's also research that talks about the working poor are very much happier. They're statistically more likely to say that they're happier than someone who is on welfare. And so there is an aspect of happiness or joy that I think begins to come with a person who's working. And what we believe is that if you start with work on the front end, the good of work on the front end, rather than trying to meet a lot of needs and then help them get into a job program. Why don't you just start the job program right on the front end? Just if a person's able to do something, employ them for it. And this is the principle of exchange. And once we get into that, we think that's what drives our shelter employment numbers higher than most, is because right off the bat, we're recognizing and awakening a sense of worth in a person through work.
Yeah, it's an amazing thing, because we tend to. I'm just working with some videos now, and the guy is talking about the curse of work, and how sometimes you grow up in contexts where work is a curse, and yet it's one of the most healing things we can do because it allows us to engage in what you call it, exchanges,
Yeah,
reciprocal exchanges, or meaningful exchanges, or something.
absolutely. Reciprocity is
Okay,
incredibly
Russ. Yeah.
important. Um, I mean, just to be on the receiving end of someone's handout perpetually. I mean, there's no one who would say that's a good idea. And in fact, I heard an African entrepreneur once say, "Just show me one nation that's ever been lifted out of poverty through aid
Hmm.
alone. Dumping aid in a nation never resolved poverty in a nation." And as soon as he said that, I thought it doesn't in people either.
Hmm.
You can dump as much aid as you want into a person, but it will never bring them out of poverty. It will only create dependency.
I'm going to go way back on something here because you talk in your training about transformation of the heart, but it goes way back, and you say one of the challenges of people that get trapped in poverty is they often don't have meaningful relationships. They don't have anybody they can go to. They don't have anybody that really can work with them, and it's meaningful relationships. What do you mean by meaningful relationships, and how do you encourage organizations that are involved in charity to create those, or what does that mean?
Well, I mean,
Is it just being nice friends, Oh, let's have tea together,
right. Well, it's deeper than that, and it's over a longer period of time. So we're advocating for those. What we do at our mission is we're looking for mentors. We'll meet weekly with people over a long period of time. That's incredibly important for people to have those kinds of relationships within the body of Christ. And a lot of folks have not had the correct type of safety net at work as they've been when they were growing up, maybe isolated for some reason, very dysfunctional family, a neighborhood that's not healthy. And so coming into the church and coming into the body of Christ and having relationships that are familial in nature and deeper provides a safety net of a different kind that is incredibly important as people are working their way out of poverty. I was thinking of a guy that came through our program. We have a long-term program for men called Forge. It's our Center for Virtue and Work. And he walked into my office. He's tall and gaunt. He's in his probably about late 40s. He's shaky, and he says, I want to be in your long-term program." And so we began to talk, and his name was John. And he told me, he said, I've got a HUD housing voucher that I could use. I've got food stamps. I'm getting approved for disability. Kind of went through this stuff. I said, "Hey, I got to tell you, if you come into our program, you've got to let it go, and you're going to have to lean into God, develop relationships within the body of Christ, work towards self-reliance. That's what this program is all about." And he did it. And we went later to a radio station. He did a radio PSA with me later on when he was, had some good clean time behind him and was doing really well. And on the radio, he talks about how he had a government package, is what he called it. These different benefits. He said it was a government package, and he said giving that government package up was the hardest decision I had ever made in my life.
Mm.
And which is a kind of a side point, but something that we should be thinking about, and how difficult it is for some people who've become dependent or see that as the only way, how hard it is for them to move away from that. And yet here's a guy who was abused by his father. He was sexually abused by his stepfather later, witnessed to a murder when he was 13 years old in his own home. And so the state would view an individual like this and say, "Yeah, you're irreparably broken. We see in you someone who needs to be simply taken care of." And yet here he comes into our program, gives it all up, ends up a full-time over-the-road truck driver, completely independent of any government subsidy and doing well. He comes back in one time to my office, and I said, "John, you're doing so great. It's so amazing to think about the time that you first stepped into my office and how your life is so transformed." And I said, what was the big thing?" Now, mind you, guys, we do like, a lot of work readiness training, computer literacy, a lot of education with classes like stewardship and economics. I mean, physical wellness. It's an intensive program. And I'm just wanting to know, what's the one thing that like made the big difference for you? And he said, it was my mentor, a guy named Tim, who was a businessman in the community, who made a commitment to meet with John every single week and walk with him through this process and be his good friend.
Wow.
And that was the thing that was so pivotal in John's life, incredibly important.
Wow.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I think what you shared here, and even one of the points you made very early on of whether the church has been crowded out of poverty relief or maybe abdicated their responsibility to it. I can tee you up for a softball here, I think. I mean, can you tell us, when we're talking about true charity, being charitable in truth, how that's impossible for institutions and governments to do that, just by the very nature of what charity is, what its definition is?
Right. Yeah. So we really believe that true charity has a few pillars, you might say. One is that it's authentic. So we think that true charity is authentic charity, which means that it's stemming from a heart of compassion.
Which
Well,
governments don't have.
right.
Right.
The governments don't have compassion.
Nor hearts. Right.
People people have compassion,
Right.
and so we see that bureaucratic forms, distant forms of charity, are actually interrupting and short-circuiting what God intended for His people, that all people that He's created, right? To have compassion for another person, and so that's certainly a part of it. But the other thing is accurate. So we talk about authentic and we talk about accurate. And accurate charity means that we are doing that investigational work. We're employing people for what they need when we can. We're getting away from just relief only, right? It's the stuff that we've already talked about. Well, government can't do that either. They can do means-tested welfare programs. So if you fall below a particular income, then we can give you a particular amount of stuff, right? But that's basically what government can do. They can't be investigational on a one-on-one basis like that. That's something that individuals do when they meet another individual. It's that face-to-face charity that's so important. And that is part of what yields an accuracy in our work. And then the other thing that we talk about is actualized. So accurate, authentic, actualized. So actualized charity deals with making sure that the service or the good that's being rendered to a person in need is actually making a difference in that person's life. That's how we use that term. And so that always leads to a discussion of outcomes. And that's another big problem with government. Government tends to count output. In fact, the USDA touts the effectiveness of a food stamp program based on how many people are participating in the program. Now, that is not a measure of effectiveness. And so if we're going to measure our effectiveness, it's going to be through how many people did we really help develop the relationships like John did with Tim. So we need to be measuring those types of things. And how many folks did we help come out of chronic poverty and get into employment and into healthy community? And so those are the types of things that we need to be measuring. And so we can make sure our charity is actually helping.
Authentic, accurate, and actualized.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
true charity is AAA rated.
There you go. Yeah.
Yes.
And the whole thing, I mean, you guys asked about how it came about, and I never really got to it. Sorry, I've been weaving around, but I'll let you know that my wife and I and our team, a decade into it, we were just banging our heads against a wall as we were finding out how we thought we could practice charity better. And what we realized is that the better we got, at least in our opinion, right? And through the learning curves and things we were reading, we realized that it always involved some aspect of challenge to people, because if you're going to get out of relief and move into rehabilitation and development, it's going to be through challenge. In fact, I always tell people, challenge develops. It's a good 2-word sentence to remember. Challenge develops. If you want to help a person develop, you're going to have to implement challenge at some point along the way. As a physical therapist, I would walk into a patient's room sometimes, and the family, no kidding, this happened more than once. The family would say, "Oh, it's the physical terrorist." They would call me a physical terrorist instead of a physical therapist. Why?
Because of the pain you inflict.
Yes, yeah, exactly. They know that I'm not going to come in and lift their great grandmother out of bed and gently set her in a chair. It's going to be work. Here we go. We got to bend your knee, roll over, push, push. You can do it. You can do it. And so you've got all this stuff going on. But the truth be told, if I didn't challenge a patient to develop a range of motion and strength, then the person becomes dependent and remains in a bed of infirmity until they perish. That's basically what would happen. Same thing happens in our care for people who are struggling in poverty. If we don't implement challenge at the right time, compassionately, people will remain in a bed of poverty until they perish as well. So challenge develops is incredibly important. But as we implemented challenge, people were leaving. It's like, hey, we're going to go somewhere else and get the lower hanging fruit for what we need today, rather than to work to develop ourselves and be free of poverty and dependency. And so at that point, we thought, hey, there's a systemic problem here. It's a systemic injustice of perverse incentives, really. There's stuff that's incentivizing people away from what is really good and healthy: accountable relationship, work. I mean, those things that are very healthy for people. And that's when we launched our True Charity Initiative. We thought, we've got to do more than change our own culture internally. We need to impact our community and even the system at work that's hurting people more than helping them. So that's how the initiative was born.
Was the universe? Oh,
well, go ahead, Dwight.
Was the university immediately a part of that? Is that what True Charity is?
No.
The training, or is it?
No, right. So
Oh,
initially, we started to do some educational events. Our administration of that charity track or network in our community was a part of that, right? And some educational events along the way. That's how it kind of started, Dwight. And then we thought, hey, let's really develop an online platform where people could access education as well. And so True Charity University became a part of the initiative.
okay. Okay.
James, did you have to use a scalpel and very delicate gloves to separate relief from the challenge? I mean, you know what I mean? Because again, there's that you don't want to swing the pendulum the complete other direction and not.
Well, right.
Yeah.
You have to investigate a little bit. It's
Yeah.
the application, it's the careful application after discernment of a work test. That's what we
Okay.
call it, okay? So you go through the process of discernment, where you're discerning what's going on with an individual, and then you want to apply a work test if that's appropriate. There was a guy up in our mission one time. I walk up and he's in the upstairs learning center area, and he's just sitting there. It's an empty room at that point, and so I was kind of confused why he was even there. I said, "What's going on?" A young guy. He said, "Oh, I'm getting some clothes today." I said, "Oh." Well, at that point, our workshop was in motion. I said, "Well, so are you working for them, or what's going on?" He said, "Yeah, they wanted me to clean the chapel." The chapel was right beside the learning center. I said, "Okay, so why aren't you?" He said, "I want to do something else. I just don't want to do that." And I said, "Well," and then I asked a key question: "Are you able to? I mean, like, is there a reason why you can't clean the chapel? You need done today. It's what you agreed to do, but you're a free man. You're free to, uh, you know, go somewhere else if you'd like, or you can stay here and clean the chapel and take the clothes that you've shopped for." And on that particular day, he got up and he left the mission without the clothes. Now, the question is, was he in need of clothing or was he not? He was not, obviously, because a person who was in need of clothing that could have actually done
With
something
ability, right? Yeah.
with ability, right, would have done that. So by applying a little work test, we were able to figure out that he was not in need of relief. Yeah.
Well, I'd like to put in a plug for your university. I think we
Please.
mentioned that before, but I took the time to go through what 5 of the 9 lessons or sessions, and I've been in the relief and development business all my life. I started it out of college and worked internationally, and that's sometimes a little different work than domestic poverty in the U.S. because of the resources we have here. But it still gives you a good understanding of what's going on in that in terms of assisting the poor. But I'm just totally impressed with your. I can't imagine any church in the United States starting a program and not taking some time and just quickly going through your course. It's better than reading a book. I'm very, very impressed. Easy to do, very clear layout, simple, fast, but the points are well made and you can't miss them. And
Sean has already put that in the
Well,
comments.
thank you. Yeah.
And you can see that at university.truecharity.us if you want to check that out for those listening.
So if you watch this YouTube and you're in a church, make sure somebody in your church sees this and signs up for it, you know.
Yeah. Thank you. That's a kind comment. And I'm so thankful for a team of people who are working with me to help develop that. Really thankful for Marvin Alasky's work that initiated a lot of that thought. So
you need to have Marvin gift you a full page ad in World Magazine. So you want to change your church's approach to poverty and make it effective? Finally,
right.
Here you go.
That's good. I'm going to call him. I'll call him and ask.
Or spend the $500. I don't know.
Yeah, right. Maybe he'll give us a rate. Yeah, that's good.
If there's a donor out there, give him $500. Get the ad out. Let's do it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, that's good. To the point we were just making, we have a dear friend of the DNA who's trying to do some U.S.-based poverty relief and through workplace employment excellence training, and plopped down in a city that has a charter bus with air conditioning, pick up anybody that wants to go to the center, the homeless shelter every morning with Wi-Fi and 2 or 3 meals. And he says, I mean, he adopted this model from Ina Richards, Dwight, has centers all over the world now on different continents and has great success with it. And he couldn't get people in the door to start it because apparently the need wasn't there
because it involves some work.
They had free Wi-Fi and free food every day. And so there's no incentive to break into the next tier of
and yet people do want to break out.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody wants to be free. James, in your course, you talk about the desire for freedom and the need for freedom. I think you associate that with justice as well, but that's a powerful concept.
Yeah, it is. And it requires inspiration on our part. So yeah, we don't want to just say, hey, we've got to somehow impact the system and that's going to fix the problem. We do have to be a people of inspiration, a people of great compassion, who are good listeners and love our brother who's struggling, brother or sister struggling in poverty. We've got to be that and do that. And that we will have much success from that alone. But I do think that we also have to couple some strategy to impact the larger system at work that is keeping people stuck in centers where they're not entering those work-ready programs that would be so helpful for them, and they just haven't experienced the joy of earned success. They don't know anything about that, and so it is an injustice that there's a system that is kind of holding them at bay. And so we really do need to impact that system as well. But it's a combination of both things that need to be done.
I loved Tim and John's story. That was wonderful. You've been around a while now. Do you have any, it might still be early, but do you have any stories of breaking the cycle, of ending generational poverty, of it being passed along? Because and Dwayne mentioned he's editing some videos from our friend Arturo Cuba. And one of the most impactful things I heard from Arturo, he said that, programs end, but what God has made last. So, you have programs, and those are good in a lot of ways, but you have families, and those are God's institutions, and so if you build cultures into those families, and you teach people a new worldview, you shift their paradigms, then you're actually, the money in a program can run out, but that's never gonna. Do you have? I mean, what's
Sure.
and
The
if it
Gold
hasn't
Star
happened
story,
yet,
James.
yeah. What are you setting
Well,
up to kind of to
well, first of all, I
put that
mean,
in motion?
so some of these things, some of these things are hard to track.
Right. Right.
It's,
Yeah.
but it is great it's been great to come into a season over the last few years where we've run into people that are fully employed, their
Mm,
families are healthy, and they'll point back to, right? This is where it all started with you guys. I just
yeah.
want to, so we've been seeing more and more of that occur as the years go on. And so that's exciting and encouraging. We do have a lady who works for us now, and her story is incredible. Of course, I'm thinking of a number of different people, and I know we don't have time to talk about a lot of them, but let me just share Jocelyn's story with you. She was um, at one point on Skid Row, living in a cardboard
Mm,
box with her son. I mean, literally. And she was a meth addict, came to Southwest Missouri, of all places, thought she was going to escape it, and that wasn't the place to come to escape that. And then she became very well known by the police, and in and out of jail, and I mean chronically homeless, drug addict. And she was referred to our mission to do community service. 400 hours of community service. It was a tremendous amount, and during that time, she'll tell you, uh, Marcia, my wife, developed a relationship with her that was life changing.
Mm.
She ended up giving her life to the Lord, and then was inspired and said, I want to come back sometime and work for this mission. She ended up going to college and ended up getting her master's degree in social work, and it came back to the mission. She's now our shelter director. So she
wow.
runs our shelter aspect of our ministry, and is now impacting the lives of her sons who had been so negatively impacted
Mm,
by her life. But boy, if I could just bring you guys into a moment in one of our morning devotions when Jocelyn is sharing how God so totally transformed her life, and truly wouldn't be able to even recognize her from where she used to be. So
Wow.
wonderful, wonderful to see that kind of,
yeah.
that's real change. That's
Yes. Praise the
really
Lord.
on the inside. Yeah.
Wow. Great story.
Thank you for sharing that.
Good for Jocelyn.
Yeah, that's great. Well, James, I mean, do you want to give them something open-ended, Dwight? James, what do you want people to hear in your last 3 minutes here with us? I mean,
What do you want us to do now?
what's we will point everyone again to connect with you, wateredgardens.org or truecharity.us. Watered Gardens is on Facebook. Is True Charity on Facebook as a standalone as well, or
It is.
okay?
It is. Yeah.
True Charity.
Mhm.
But check
Yeah.
out the beautiful True Charity website. It really is
And
nice.
if I could leave one thought,
Yes,
I
please.
I think that as we engage people who are struggling in poverty, I think the most, and this is anybody, right? So driving by, somebody's holding a cardboard sign, will work for food. I mean, every single individual. If we will just ask ourselves, am I the person that really should be doing something here? Or is there somebody that's more closely affiliated with that individual that I should try to bring into the picture?
Hmm.
If we'll ask that question, we will be much less apt to step in and inadvertently create a divide between people who ought to be involved, people who are more closely associated with that individual. So we always should be thinking about how to connect family. Are you involved in a church somewhere that I could reach out to? But there is a huge interference with this principle of subsidiarity, the idea that those smaller institutions and the people most closely associated with individuals ought to be the first. to help those people
Mm.
rather than larger, more bureaucratic systems. But even on a micro level, we can interfere with the principle of subsidiarity. And so we just need to be asking ourselves, how can I know enough about this individual to involve the right people to be a part of helping that person before I step in and inadvertently become paternal in
Mm.
my so something to think about.
Say that question one more time. How can I find out enough about this person?
Yeah, how can I, yeah, investigate enough to know who is most closely affiliated with this individual,
Yeah.
that way I can reach and bring that person into what's going on rather than stepping in and thinking I'm the one that needs to meet this particular need. And this requires, again, investigative, careful, and often slow charity.
Mm. Thank you.
And,
Now
and
I
I
know
like,
what, well, Dwight. I was going to say I know what the principle of subsidiarity is, but Dwight might not know. So could you say that in another way, maybe better for
Yeah.
the?
So if you think of, we even go through subsidiarity exercises with classes, and it's basically if a guy is if a person who's poor is in need of help, would you say that the first person that ought to be helping is uh, the person's immediate family, or would you think it to be a Watered Gardens mission,
Hmm.
or would you think it to be the state government?
Right.
And so you have to think, wait, it should be the person's immediate family first. So people at our mission are trained to ask that question. Where's your family? I want to reach out and contact that individual. That's incredibly important.
Yeah.
I remember I was sitting across from a guy one time and he had a need. I don't remember what it was. I asked that question, where's your family? He said, oh, they're in California. Don't want anything to do with me. I said, well, tell me more. Ended up, I got his mother's name. She was in the white pages. He hadn't talked to her in years. I called her with his permission. He's sitting across the desk and I'm calling. I speak with his mother and I'm saying, yeah, your son is across the desk from me. Could I hand the phone? Would you talk with him? I said, hey, your mom would talk with you. And so I hand the phone over and he's talking with his mother for the first time in years. And then a couple of weeks later, his sister from California flies in, embraces him in the foyer of my mission and takes him back to California to be with his family. His mother then sent me a letter later on that said, thank you for giving my son back to me. Now that's beautiful. And those are the kinds of things that happen if we just make sure that we're not too quick to step in and interfere and say, hey, you know what? It's just about me helping you rather than potentially involving family or more closely affiliated relationships. It's
Mhm.
important to consider.
I'm not crying. You're crying, Dwight.
Well, I was just thinking about that because the first time I read it, I thought, nobody should misconstrue that's just so the government doesn't have to help them. It's like, no, the reason that works is because that's God's design.
Yeah.
And if you really want to love that guy, you connect him to his mom. If you really want to help him, you connect him.
I
And
think there's all
it's
sorts of
that,
levels there. There's
it's
relational
that,
capital levels there. There's
right, but it's just, I like the way that you said it's pointing back to God's design for that person, and whatever it takes for us to help move people towards that. And you're saying, well, in this case, it means connecting him to his mom many times, and most of the time. So
Yeah.
it's just great. It's so clear.
Yeah. That's what subsidiarity is all about.
All right.
So,
Thank you
There are a
for
lot
explaining that to Dwight. I appreciate it. All right. Well, hey, we are out of time. James, what a pleasure. God bless you, sir. Again, we'd like to invite you all to check out True Charity, truecharity.us, wateredgardens.org. I'm sure there's a university, so there's tools to equip yourselves. There's also ways to support the ministries. And we're Disciple Nations Alliance. We invite you to check out disciplenations.org, visit our website, sign up for our newsletter so you're aware of all the news coming out. Dwight, any final thoughts? And if not, would you pray for James on our way out here?
final thoughts. I'd love to pray.
Okay.
Father, thank you for our brother James and all of the people that he connects with and works with, and the cadre of partners he has. And I just thank you for the opportunity to hear from him, to learn from him. Thank you for the tools that they're creating that can help all of us be the people you want us to be and serve others the way you want us to serve. So we just commit our lives again to you and ask you to help us, to help others to grow in your design for our lives. And especially for James, bless him, encourage him, inspire him, give him all that he needs to be the leader of his home, of his mission. There's always challenges, so please give him wisdom and strength and encouragement today. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. God bless you, James.
It's been a
Thank you,
blessing to
Dwight.
be with you guys.
Oh,
I've
gosh.
really enjoyed the time. Thank you so
All
much.
right.
I could
Thanks
just
a
listen
lot.
to a highlight reel of your success stories. Thank you for sharing. Thank you all for tuning in live, for watching on YouTube later, or listening to our podcast. Be sure to like and share, and we will see you back here in 2 weeks. Thank you, and God bless.